felt like our House Democrats worked extremely hard this session. We had a list of priorities that we hope to accomplish, and we felt like when we set these goals out, it's going to be difficult, and some may say nearly impossible. But when I look back, sort of the list of things that we talked about at the beginning of session, and then what actually came to the conclusion here at the end of session, we did some things. For example, when we talk about, I talked about this in my opening speech back in 2019, and then again in 2021 with regards to more money for traditional public education, obviously pay raises for teachers. We haven't really seen an investment like this in the budget since 2012. We've been talking about more money for public health, mental health, quality of life projects. This budget contained money for infrastructure, trails, broadband, water infrastructure, things like that. So we felt like, it was a good budget for the House Democrats, for us to work with, because it aligned really nicely with the priorities that we set out in the beginning of this session. Obviously, House Bill, a couple other things, House Bill 1004, assistance to small businesses. And if we go forward here, we want to make sure that the money gets out the door. Obviously, House Bill 1006, which was something that Representative Robin Shackelford from my caucus worked with, across the aisle with Representative Steuerwald, but that was a bill that was passed early on in the session, but very happy with that. So, I'm going to turn it over to Senator Taylor here, but I think as House Democrats, as I said, we can look back and feel satisfied that we got a lot of things accomplished. When you go into a long session and what it looks like going to be a difficult year, and you're in a super minority, you might not think you're going to get things done. But when I look back at the list here, we did quite a bit. And I'm very pleased with that. Senator Taylor.
So thank you for being here. So I'm really proud of the Senate Democratic Caucus this year. Senate Democrats came into this session with a attitude that we're going to fight for Hoosiers. And it seems that fight yielded some results that we can really be proud of. We had a lot of wins. Representative GiaQuinta spoke about House Bill 1006. We all know what happened this summer, culminating in what happened a couple of days ago. But one of the things we knew is that we needed some real and true police reform in the state of Indiana. And I have to say that every member of the General Assembly stepped up with that legislation passing without any negative votes. In addition to that, Senator Talion in our caucus was advocating for juvenile justice on behalf of kids who needed a second chance. Her bill would allow these kids to have their records expunged automatically unless the court determined otherwise. I think that's a tremendous thing. Senator Melton talked about submitted bills, offered budget amendments that would increase funding to the tune of $680 million for K through 12, got $600 million. That was tremendous. Senator David Niskoski fought for subsidies for foster families. That was in the budget bill. And after being told no and no again, and wondering sometimes, even the media, why do we fight? Our fights have finally yielded some results that we can be proud of. We've been fighting for public education and the inadequate funding. And as I said, and I will continue to say, we shouldn't be patting ourselves on the back for something that we should have been doing anyway. But one of the things that we did recognize through this pandemic is how important and how hardworking teachers are. And I'm glad we did something to make sure they have an opportunity to see pay raises. We fought against big government. Those of you in the media know we started out with several bills, including the Indigo bill, Senate Bill 168, Senate Bill 394, all these bills that we all know was just big government coming in, trying to take over local jurisdictions. We beat those down, and they never saw the light of day. The election bill, Senate Bill 353, a tremendous amount of effort to knock that down. It was successful. House Bill 1369 that caused all the consternation in the House never even got a hearing in the Senate. That's huge. We were able to defeat these bills in a bipartisan fashion, just like we were able to pass a budget in a bipartisan fashion. But we didn't do this alone here in Indiana. The National Democratic Party contributed considerably. The American Rescue Act put us in a position where the state of Indiana, like other states across the country, should all be applauding Congress and the Senate for putting together a package that puts us back in a position where we can rebound from this pandemic. We've got diversion, however, of over 1,600% increase in vouchers since its implementation in the state of Indiana. We should be concerned, and I am concerned about where we're going with this. Although the 2021 legislative session is officially, well, non-officially over, I'm so proud of my caucus. This is one of the best sessions for Democrat legislation that I've ever seen. And we owe that a lot to the strength of the members in the Senate Democrat Caucus. Our commitment will remain the same as Senate Democrats. We will continue to fight for the people. The people is how we're going to be measured. No matter where we go, no matter who we are, no matter who we see, it's going to be basically how do we treat the people that we represent. And I think we've been treating them pretty well in the Senate Democrat Caucus. With that, we've opened to any questions you might have.
This is for both of you. The word transformational has been used a lot to describe the budget and the session by quite a few people. What word would each of you choose to describe the 2021 session?
I would say unprecedented. I mean, we knew that when the numbers that were projected last Thursday, I believe, I think everyone took a step back and said, wow, this is unprecedented. I mean, I'm not sure if we're, going to ever be in a position like this to be able to do some things. And as I said on the House floor, let's give credit where credit is due. President Joe Biden and the Democrats in Washington, D.C. that put forth this bill very quickly, I might add. And he's doing a great job early on here in his administration. But that money that's going to that got in the hands of folks who are going to spend it and get the economy moving and generate more revenue, and obviously the revenue that's going to come to the state and out to the locals throughout the state of Indiana is going to be huge. And I talked about the projects earlier, and there's just going to be a lot of things that I think are going to be happening, and I think we can just frankly thank the folks out in Washington, D.C., starting with President Joe Biden.
Yeah, I would agree with my colleague. Without the American Rescue Plan, I don't know if we'd be standing here today. But the word that I used earlier today was interesting. Interesting because guess where the money came from that we were able to predict a higher forecast for the people. And the people of the state of Indiana took it upon themselves to spend their money and help us not only with income tax revenue, but sales tax revenue, which is our largest revenue generator. So when we look at what we have fiscally to start with, we need to thank the citizens of the state of Indiana. But unfortunately, what we did in the Senate, at least, is we did little things like we're going to now tax their unemployment insurance benefits that they received last year. As a matter of fact, the author of the bill said it's only $323. But at the same time, the PPP loans that the business community sought and they're going to be forgiven, we don't tax this income in Indiana. I think that's a stark contrast in where we start thinking about the people. So, we're going to not only thank the federal government and the Biden administration, but we also need to thank Hoosiers. They're the ones who did it. They're the ones who went out and did what that money was supposed to do. It spurred the economy. So I think it's interesting because I don't know what we're going to do 2 years from now, but I pray that we keep the same trajectory that we had this year.
Why do you think the Republicans didn't take up some of the issues that were out there, like over the emergency order, stricter abortion bans, lifting the gun permit repeal, things like that? Why do you think they didn't go further on some of those issues?
Not only was this session interesting from an administrative standpoint, where we had to socially distance and everything, but one of the things that I saw was that there's a lot of members of the caucus that didn't want to be taken hostage by a lot of rhetoric associated with, constitutional carry, all those issues that separate us. And one of the things that I noticed was that when those issues started coming to fruition, the Republican leadership took people to the woodshed. I mean, there's a lot of members who are not going to be happy in that caucus at the result that they got, because they can't take a lot of things back to their communities that they thought they were going to be able to get done, even in a supermajority. So I think there was just a lot of consternation, fear. They see what happened in Georgia. Indiana is set up to produce the same kind of results if they had gone that far. And I think that they just took a hint from the rest of the country and decided, do we really want to take this kind of leap right now? I'm not saying that it won't be done again, but they definitely didn't have the wherewithal to do it right now.
I'd say a lot of these bills are just way too extreme. I thought our members on the House side, I'm sure your members as well, did an excellent job of asking questions, poking holes in this legislation. And by the way, also in Senate Bill 353, I want to give credit to the corporate community for stepping up. Cummins, Eli Lilly, that showed up to testify against that bill. And we need more companies around the state to start doing that, particularly here in Indianapolis. I live in Fort Wayne. I drive around Indianapolis. It's a beautiful city. It's a city that really it's the engine that really gets Indiana going. And for the senators over there that continue to try to micromanage as if they're still on the Indianapolis City Council is ridiculous. And I will tell you that it's just not House. I can say that you don't have to worry about it. They're not. But the House members on both sides of the aisle that I talk to are really, frankly, getting tired of it. They really are. And I don't know what is going to happen with that type of legislation going forward. But I do think that they, frankly, overstepped their bounds on some of this stuff.
At the last minute, we put in some vaccine passport language into a bill. I just wondered, do you guys think that was necessary for the state?
I don't think any of that is necessary. The vaccine passport was kind of, that we're not going to abide by any laws or anything associated with having a card associated with whether or not you have a vaccine as a way to be able to travel. I haven't understood why we're delving that deep into things. I mean, it's kind of like we want to talk about what color your carpet could be in your house. I mean, where does it stop? There's a lot of things that happen during these most difficult times. And one of the things that I just don't get an understanding of is, there was something that had to be done. I mean, we couldn't sit back and do nothing. And some of the things that we did is the reason why we're open today. So I just don't understand why people will want to go back to a time. I mean, if you think back to March, the end of March 2020, do we really want to end up back in that predicament? Even if, if President Biden has the guts to do what President Trump didn't do you think that he wants to do it? So we should do everything to try to make sure that we stay safe, that once we get control of this pandemic and get the things in place necessary, the whole thing about not abiding, we passed a resolution about not abiding by gun restriction laws, that we're not going to do it. I mean, pretty straightforward. We're not going to abide by any gun restriction laws that the federal government. First of all, we can't do that. Second, why would you take time? I think we spent over an hour discussing that issue in the Senate, and I just didn't understand it. So Nikki, I don't know why you would sneak something like that in at the last minute, but we had that language associated. I mean, people need to be really concerned about this UI thing. There are people who by May 15th are going to have to pay income taxes on their benefits that they received during this pandemic. We could have done that in January, so at least they had some time to prepare. But we waited until the last day of the session to actually get that passed. I just don't get it.
Everybody over on Zoom. Eric?
Hi, yeah, I was trying to figure out why the sound went out. Senator, I wanted to go back to something you mentioned on the floor at the very end. You were talking about how no one really knew what was going to happen with this session at the beginning, but there was a lot of trepidation about it. I guess, two-part question. What is it that allowed us to get through 4 months without any significant disruptions? And what carries over to next year when there's not a pandemic? What changes did we make that are worth continuing?
That's a good question. Like I said, administratively, it was very topsy-turvy of what we were going to do. But one of the things that I want to commend my colleague leader, the president pro tem in the Senate, listen, it was a hard task for him to ask his members to wear a mask on the floor. I mean, if you looked around, I've never seen so much eating on the floor, okay? And eating, I mean, food, it was just unbelievable. And that was one of the exceptions that he gave them, that they could have their masks off. I mean, there were senators who, I mean, I'm not the most physically fit person. Let me just say this, all right? And I knew that if I caught the coronavirus, odds are I would be one of those guys that was going to be in the hospital because I don't have the best physical stature. But there were guys in their caucus that don't have the best physical appearance that didn't want to wear a mask. And I was like, man, even if it's doesn't never happen, isn't that okay? And then Senator Bray had to, I'm telling you, there were days that he would lean over to me and he'd be like, man, I can't tell you how tough it is. Please don't tell me about one of my members not wearing a mask on the floor anymore, because they're getting tired. I mean, I would tell them. And then we had somebody designated up in the balcony and we'd be like, look, they're not wearing their mask. You need to go tell your whip to go tell them to put their mask on. So we did some things proactively to make sure that they had their masks on. But I want to thank Senator Bray because that was a heavy lift for him. And remember, he kept his on. He did what he was asking his members to do. Now, that whole thing, for those of you who were over in the building, when you walked out in the hallway and you saw these legislators, whole different ball game. I mean, and hey, the interesting part, I asked a couple of them, I said, hey, have you been vaccinated? Well, that's none of your business. Well, it is actually at this point, because if you're not, and you're walking around here without a mask on, whatever you're spewing out of your mouth could get to me. So I had those conversations, but I think it was just a combination of working hard and making sure Senator Bray did a great job, in my opinion, just enforcing the rules that we had on the floor of the Senate.
Yeah, and I'll just say that our members, I thought, did really pretty good job of wearing masks. I can't really say that, frankly, for the other side. It started off well, and then yeah, it wasn't so great. But there are some other things too, I think, that helped, where we were situated over there. I think probably more distance between us, between you all. We, didn't do the resolution that we typically do that can run an hour and a half. And then, because the comment was made, we didn't have one late night where we were bringing in food. And I think the whole strategy there, and I'll give LSA credit, Adam Brown and those that really did a nice job over the summer trying to figure this out. I think JD Ford was on your list. I had Delaney on our side, who really, I think, did a nice job of trying to figure out the best way for us to get through this session. I think most people, if you had to guess, most folks said there was going to be an interruption and then we weren't going to be able to finish. So kudos to at least the House Democrats, I think, did a really nice job of keeping their mask on for session.
Senator Phil, question for you, gentlemen. This basically goes to redistricting. Obviously, you guys are going to come back and draw maps, and Republicans have a supermajority. But looking at just some of the data, I noticed that 74 counties in Indiana, primarily rural ones, are losing population or staying very stagnant. All the growth is in either the city or suburbs. Do you see yourselves maybe getting a member or two out of redistricting simply because of population shifts or trends?
I think, well, let me answer that question quickly first and then elaborate, because I think what you're saying is, so basically you get membership by basically drawing the maps to your benefit. I think that's what you're saying. So just saying that, yeah, as a matter of fact, Abdul, when you look at the population shifts in the Senate, of the top 10 populations or Senate districts for population loss, 9 of them are Republican districts. They're going to have to get really creative, especially in central Indiana. And I think that's why the Senate Democrats are going to get a lot of good help from people, general public, to look at how we're doing this, how we're going to put these maps together. And yeah, I do think listen, I think it's just naturally going to happen, because I think people are tired of the same old every year. Okay. I think there's some consternation on their part that their party has moved so far that they keep coming back with these pieces of legislation that we have to fight on a yearly basis. And quite frankly, people want us to get down to the real business, which is making sure that Indiana stays one of the best places to raise a family. So the redistricting that's going to happen, I want to caution all of you to be very proactive, because here's what could happen. Do understand that you have to live by the Constitution. You have to live in your district a year before you run for office. If there's some shenanigans going on, I'm going to call it. It's not like you can't get somebody's address. I mean, I could pull up every finance statement and personal finance statement. You can get the address of every member. And if they start playing games by drawing members out, knowing they only have maybe 3 or 4 weeks to move back into their district, that's not something I'm going to accept. So along with being very diligent and making sure that the public has some input in this, I think it's going to be difficult with the population shifts for them to maintain the supermajority numbers that they have today.
I haven't seen any data, but obviously we've seen where school populations are going down in the rural areas. So imagine that's where they're losing population in those rural areas, which happen to be mostly occupied by Republicans. I will say this, though, is that one disappointment to come out of this session is not to get moved forward with redistricting reform. House Democrats and even some House Republicans have pushed for this over the last 10 years and have not been able to be able to move on that. We offered an amendment on the floor. We did amendments, tried amendment in committee. We added a minority report. We tried all kinds of things to move forward with an independent commission modeled after the Iowa plan that we thought was fair, that's worked well for the state of Iowa over the last 30 years. So that's still very disappointed, because as we've said before, we just don't believe that legislators should be drawing their own maps.
I'd like to also bring up one thing. The Senate Democrats, we offered an amendment that just changed the standards, not an independent commission, still left the responsibility up to the General Assembly to draw the maps. But all we did was offer standards that said, hey, you should be making sure not only are the districts contiguous, which is the only standard we have in Indiana, they should be compact. You shouldn't be separating precincts. You shouldn't be packing people of common generality in the same area. Just simple standards that, listen to this number, over 38 states already have. We can't get that done in Indiana. And it didn't take the responsibility away from the legislature for drawing the maps. And it was troubling to see that amendment went down along party lines.
Hi, can you hear me? Awesome. So I wanted to know, how do you feel transparency went overall this session? I know there were a lot of concerns that with the pandemic restrictions, not everyone's voice would be heard this session. Do you feel like in some ways that ended up happening, or do you think it was better than expected?
Yeah, I'd have to think too. The Commerce Committee is always fun to watch in the House. I know that we had a tight 2-hour time limit so that we could get the meetings going and out of there. So I had to come back and disinfect the room, things like that. Yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, it was business as usual. I would have to kind of think of some things. I think where the transparency disappears sometimes, or a lot of times, is every session, which is during conference committee time, and when language is flying around from one bill to the next, and there's germaneness issues and things like that. And then obviously it's difficult. Probably the worst part this session was, I think most of the public really didn't want to come down here and testify, and then they would have to log on via Zoom. I think that really cut down on the lack of public input on things, and hopefully we'll get back to some sort of a semblance of normalcy when it comes to allowing citizen input on bills.
Yeah, one of the things that I saw during the session in regards to committee was that people would write letters and they'd send a letter to the chair of the committee, and like clockwork, we'd get the letters right when the bill was being heard, right? So you got to either decide you're going to read the letter or you're going to listen to the testimony on the bill. And remember, the people who are down here testifying, certain organizations that have the ability to fund several lobbyists would be down here. The people who didn't have the resources just thought, hey, if I send this letter, they'll read it, they'll listen to me. And there was one committee, I remember it was corrections, there were 5 letters. And the chairman said, this was after the committee adjourned, oh, I forgot to give you guys all these letters. And I'm like, these letters were relative to the bills that we had today. So there was some of that going on. And then like Leader GiaQuinta said, it was during the conference committee reports. It's always difficult, especially when you have to trust what they're saying there, while at the same time you're looking at what it is. I mean, I got a conference committee report and we were testifying on it 7 minutes later. So that just happens as a natural process in the General Assembly, I think.
Are there any more questions? All right, that concludes today's press conference. Thanks for joining. Thank you.